Again, everyone, I want to say hello and welcome to today's webinar presentation titled Protect Your Practice from Potential Threats. My name is Ryan Miller. I'm the CEO of Etna Interactive. We're going to spend just about the next 45 minutes together going through 12 potential risk situations and how, as practice leaders, you can take action to mitigate those risks and protect your practice. We'll specifically be looking at threats and risks that exist in the online arena and what you need to do. So for those that may have missed the 90s movie, The Breakup, it's a story that makes light of really bad separations. And in the course of the movie, the couple unfortunately decides that their relationship isn't going to last, that they need to part, but they're both so in love with their condo that they start a subtle war of sabotage and trying to convince the other person that they need to move out so that the other can keep the condo. And while it is a rather hilarious view of separations, I think our reality today is that whether the separation is maybe with an employee who have played an active role in our online marketing or with an agency that's been partnered with us, there is some significant risk of a bad separation causing really no humor, but some significant harm to the clinic. The way that I've structured this presentation today is perhaps a little different than what, for those of you that have attended webinars in the past, what we've done in the past. I've established essentially 12 vignettes, 12 scenarios or 12 areas of concern where we'll talk through a potential area of risk, and then we'll present a short list of actions that you might take as the practice leader to mitigate those risks. I want to remind you all that on the right-hand side of the screen, you should have access, for those that are participating in the live session, to a box labeled questions. Go ahead and expand that. And throughout the course of the presentation, on any one of those slides or scenarios, feel free to type a question in directly. If possible, we'll address it in real time. Otherwise, we'll hold those for the end of today's webinar. So let's dive right in and get down to business. The first thing that we need to be aware of is that your domain name, so your website addresses, may be perhaps the most valuable assets that you own online. And unfortunately, we've seen very many scenarios where well, one of two things happen. The domain name was registered by a member of the practice, a staff member inside the clinic, at some point in history, and that staff member then moves on. Alternately, we see commonly a scenario where in your initial relationship with an agency, you hire that agency to create that domain name for you. And in either one of those two instances, we run into challenges wherein either the domain name is actually registered to a third party, that the official owner of your website address could be your vendor or a past employee or even a current employee. And the risk that we have here is at the time of separation, all the work that you've done to build a website, to accumulate search engine rankings, to print that website address on your collateral and in promotional materials, all of those efforts can be very easily undermined if you are not, in fact, the owner, or the word that we use here in domain name parlance is registrant. If you're not the owner on that domain name, you're at perhaps one of the most perilous risks as it relates to your online enterprise. Now, there's a thing out there called Whois. It's a cute name that's assigned to a tool that allows us to see, in most cases, the registrant data. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of today's webinar, I'll be sharing a copy of the deck out for all of our live participants. If you happen to be catching this in the recording, my email address will be available at the end. Feel free to write me and request a copy as well. You can type the web address that you see on your screen in, or simply click the link when you get the copy of the deck in a few days, and use that tool to perform what's called a Whois lookup or a Whois search. You'll type in your domain name or domain names, and you'll be able to see back the current data on the for who is listed as the registrant or the owner of the domain name. Now, there is such a thing as what's called private registry. That basically means that the Whois lookup will not return in a public display the listing of who is in fact the owner. If that's the case, see if you can find the login and password for the registrar, the place where you created or secured that domain name. Or simply ask your agency to provide you with a screen capture once they're logged in of your current registrant settings. What you want to see here is that your business name, that your business phone number, and the contact details associated with you as the registrant reflect the practice, not an agency or some individual who maybe now or may have been historically associated with your business. That's the first and best thing that you can do to protect this incredibly valuable asset, your practice domain names. Let's move on and let's talk about a second scenario and a second area where you might, again, undertake a little mini project to understand what you're in for in the event that you should ever have to separate from the agency that currently maintains your website for you. Now, our advice to all clinics, all practices, is that you actually own your site. You own a full and functional version of your website. That means the text, the images, and the underlying code that allows your site to function. Now, what the title of this slide says is own your site or own that you don't. Now, there are certainly instances and there are certainly agencies whose business models are based on the idea that they lease your website to you. And there are cases where, while we don't typically recommend this, there are cases where this is an entirely appropriate business decision. For you as a practice leader to say, you know, I don't want to own my site. Just like my car, I'm going to choose to lease it. But it will be important in those instances that you understand the liability should you intend to move on, and that you've considered your total cost of ownership in that lease-like scenario. Now, what we recommend to practice leaders here is that you review your contract carefully and that you understand the elements of the site that you own and those that you don't. Now, you have to watch out in those contracts and in the sales language for words like proprietary, language about the agency owning the platform or underlying technology, and the possibility of exit penalties. And I'll share little stories about each one of these. So proprietary is just a code word for we own it and you don't. And you need to be careful that while that sounds like an exciting idea at the time of purchase, when it's time for you to separate, if you decide to leave your agency partner, what that means is that the underlying technology doesn't come with your site. And very often what you're left with is a stripped down version of the site, the images, the raw text, and a fairly lengthy and potentially expensive process for a new agency partner to put those pieces back together. The same thing might be true as well if the partner that you're with today more explicitly declares in your contract that they own the platform or they own the technology that makes your site work. So just be aware what you would be in for, and certainly as you sign new contracts, what you're getting yourself into in those situations. We've also seen a fairly significant number of agencies that ascribe exit penalties. Let's talk about why this comes in and why it's a risk. Now, for many agencies who want to win your business, one of the ways that they can reduce the cost of your website to win that relationship with you up front is to backload, place into the back end of agreement, any additional costs that they might like. So what we've seen in these cases are contracts where there are exit clauses where you have to pay thousands of dollars to buy out your content or the functional version of your website as a way to both discourage you from leaving, so it's a penalty, but also to get additional monies out of you at the time you leave. And unfortunately, what it looks like is the initial purchase of the website is a great deal if you don't catch these clauses in a careful contract review. Now, unfortunately, in the industry right now, there's some uncertainty for some site owners. We've certainly heard from some folks that they're concerned about the potential integrity of their sites with the agency they're with today. And our advice here is, when in doubt, identify what you are entitled to and request a backup copy of those elements right now. Now, it may take a little time. It's probably reasonable for your agency partner to charge you a few $100s to grab all of those assets, get them organized, perhaps burn them to a CD, a zip drive, or to put them in a Dropbox folder and transmit them to you. But just like you might need a backup copy of the data files that you use in your day-to-day business, having a backup copy of your site files, if you're concerned about the integrity or the viability of your website hosting partnership, this isn't a bad thing to have in your back pocket. Keep in mind, any changes made after you create that backup won't be present in those files, but it will at least provide you with something that you could use to reestablish your site in the event that something happened and your hosting was discontinued. The third thing I want to talk about is your data and understanding what may be collected, what may be stored in databases today as you participate in owning and maintaining a fairly sophisticated website. Our recommendation to business leaders here is that you have an open conversation with your agency and prepare a list of those critical databases where your data is stored and protected. Now today that might include things like an email subscriber list, a database or a record of all of the inquiries that are captured online. For those of you that are using call tracking, the record of your phone leads is fairly important. Your photo gallery today is very likely powered by a database. Testimonial content may be stored in data as well as well as the reviews that are captured on third-party websites. As you have that conversation, make that list and come to understand, where does the data live? How is it secured? And in the event of a separation, would that data be shared with you, or would you have access to get at that particular data? Now, we've interestingly seen some HIPAA violations, some cases surrounding HIPAA that have come up recently directly related to this data. So there's a second reason why you might want to understand where you're storing sensitive data and who has access to it. We've seen in California at least one case where a staff member who had access to sensitive patient data in separation revealed that information in an effort to cause harm to their former employer. And so you actually do, for those of you that are on the call from the United States, you do have a mandate, if you are a HIPAA covered entity, to restrict and understand who has access to what may be very sensitive patient data, especially as we look at things like your photo gallery, your online inquiries, records of all your phone calls, just to understand how are they accessed, how are they maintained, and what would we do? How would you get at that data in the event that you separated from an employee or from the agency that has access to or control of that data today? So as you're probably coming to understand already, each one of these things for you as a practice leader is going to require that you sit down, that you have an open conversation, that you do a little bit of work and a lot of documentation. And this last one here is as we start to transition slowly out of looking at what might happen if we separated from an agency and started looking at our staff, is really about understanding the implications of an exit. So based on that contract that you looked at earlier, seeking to understand what would happen at separation is something that we actually encourage as an open conversation with your agency partner. And in fact, I think this is a really good thing to encourage as you start a new agency relationship at any point in the future. Let this be a part of your discussion about how, not just how great the relationship is going to be as you get it started, but what would happen and how does the agency behave when it's time to separate. We encourage this both through an open conversation with your agency partner, but also as you're checking references to actually ask, can we talk to somebody with whom you've separated to learn more about how that went and how your agency as a partner supported you when you decided to leave. So as awkward as this conversation might be, we would hope that your partnerships with your agency are strong enough that you can simply say, I'm fine, I think our relationship is going great today, but I would like to understand if at a point in the future we decided to separate, what does that look like and how does that process work? The reality today of moving your online enterprise, which likely includes a website, a photo gallery, a blog, there's likely third-party modules that power aspects of your site like review and testimonial content. As we saw a moment ago, there's very, very possibly databases of email subscribers, databases of past inquiries, records of phone calls, and as we'll talk about in a moment, a major list of login and passwords that will all need to be addressed in the moment of separation. It's good to know what you're going to be in for should you ever come to that place that you need to part ways with your vendor. As the practice leader, it's going to be incumbent upon you to build a plan for an effective separation, knowing this data will arm you to make those decisions in the future. We do recommend that practice leaders maintain access to their own Google Analytics. Now, for those those that aren't familiar, Google Analytics is a free service provided by Google. It's perhaps today the most popular and ubiquitous way of analyzing data about who's using your site and how they're using it. Now, very commonly, Google Analytics as accounts are established by agencies who build your first website. And hopefully, as your site evolves over time, each new vendor is maintaining the old profile so you have continuity of your data. Now, should something happen, should you suspect that an agency partner is underperforming, if you think a problem may come up with your online marketing and you want to diagnose it yourself, you want to take a look to see if it's a real problem or not, having this access can be incredibly important. And let me share a little story of someone that's just contacted us recently. A practice had retained an agency to perform a redesign for them with some fairly significant updates to the site structure. It unfortunately at the time of launch did not go well, and they saw a very significant drop or decline in their search engine rankings. They had approached us through a third party and said, hey, could you just help us diagnose why this happened so that we can have a productive conversation with our agency partner and give them some direction about how we work together to resolve this. And for our part, in order to perform any meaningful diagnosis, we needed to be able to see data, access to those analytics, in order to be able to help that clinic triage and troubleshoot what was exactly happening. Well, of course, they didn't have access yet, and it took a situation that was already very heated and made it even more uncomfortable for both parties when in the midst of turmoil, they had to reach out and say, I need access to Google Analytics now. Our advice is to ask for shared access to Google Analytics during the good times, while things are going well, so that it doesn't complicate conversations and it doesn't leave you completely disarmed in the event that something should happen and you want to look at the raw data yourself so that you can understand, has my visitation been impacted? Is my traffic that's coming from Google up or down? And access to Google Analytics will help you do exactly that. For practice leaders as well, I want to recommend that you take the time to learn just enough in Google Analytics. Your agency partner today should hopefully welcome the chance to give you a little bit of training on this topic to at least understand what's happening in terms of visitor trends and what are called referral source or just source trends. These two reports will allow you to see how are we doing overall with traffic through the site and which of our referral sources are driving what amount of traffic. With that access, you can understand if there's a deviation and see visually if there's a deviation in trend that might tell you it's time for a critical conversation with your agency or vendor partner. So let's keep moving on, and let's talk next about monitoring marketing. I think I'll lead this one with a little story that for me was a little surprising when it happened. So recently contacted by a practice that was concerned that their marketing wasn't performing very well. They started to describe to us the services that they thought that their agency partner, the agency that they hired, was undertaking. And we were startled to see one of the items that had been promised to them was 4 blog posts a week. Now, granted, that's a very extreme number. I think for most clinics, that would be a very unusual frequency for blog posting, especially blogs that offer quality content. But when we looked at their site and actually just, well, clicked the link titled blog on the page, what we found is that the last blog post that had been published to their site was back in 2013. So they had been paying hundreds of dollars every month for more than 4 years, and not a single post had appeared on their blog. Now, it wasn't surprising in that case that their marketing results weren't better, but it was surprising that the practice had gone so long without catching that the basic services that were promised in the relationship with their agency simply weren't being delivered. Now, oftentimes we hear from practice leaders, well, you know, it's very technical, it's complex. I can't understand what they're doing. And my answer back to that is that's hogwash. It's just not true. Everything that we do today in the name of search engine optimization, online marketing, is immediately visible to the naked eye. And while some aspects of search engine optimization today are in fact technical, they're not so technical that given 5 minutes you couldn't understand the what and the why was done in any particular month. So our feedback and our recommendation to practice leaders is keep agencies like us accountable. take the time periodically, perhaps every 3 months, to review the marketing activities in each of the service lines that are promised to you and ensure that you're receiving the value that you expect for the money that you pay for those services each and every month. Now, we're recommending as well that practice leaders ask their agency for backlink checks about 1 to 2 times a year. Let me pause for a second here and explain, because some of you won't be familiar with backlinks or what a backlink check can reveal to you. Backlinks are simply the links from other sites pointing back to your site. The direction here matters. Links from a society website, Chamber of Commerce, the Better Business Bureau, your local news media that reference your practice and point and link to you, those are your backlinks. The accumulation of those backlinks can serve as a signal to Google indicating that your site is popular, it's respected, that each one of those links is viewed by Google as kind of a virtual vote of popularity that suggests that you're deserving of higher rankings. Now, the challenge today is there are such things as bad backlinks. Just as there are maybe people in your market, individuals or doctors that you know that you maybe wouldn't want their referral, you wouldn't want to be associated with their recommendation. There are sites on the internet that you don't want to be associated with. They may be sites that contain pornography. They may be sites that make light or humorous of medical procedures. They may be spam sites that are set up to entrap people and earn money from showing them advertisements. Whatever those are, the risk that we have today is Google now can penalize sites. They can drop your site's rankings when you accumulate a disproportionate number of low-quality backlinks. And unfortunately, this tactic can be used by a competitor or former employee to harm the practice. We've seen this increasingly, and it's a new and unfortunate truth. Now, most often what happens is we will receive a call from a practice that doesn't understand why their rankings have fallen. They're angry and disappointed with their current agency relationship, and the agency perhaps just isn't watching. They're not watching your backlink profile for you, and they sort of throw up their hands and say, well, sometimes sites drop. We'll try to do more positive link building. But when we take a fresh pair of eyes, because we're being brought in from the outside, and we look at what's going on, we always perform this backlink check before we take on new clients. And more and more often today, what we're seeing is, well, gosh, it looks like maybe your site has come under attack because we're seeing a really large number of bad backlinks. Or it may just be that in your past, historically, you hired an SEO agency that wasn't so reputable and used some tactics that are discouraged, and now you're paying the price for it. By checking, though, proactively your backlinks every 6 months or so, and we do this automatically for all of our existing accounts, by doing that, you can get out in front of the potential risk of losing rankings and having months and months while you're trying to set the situation right and regain those rankings. So doing this proactively is a way to protect yourself. A lot of agencies haven't adopted this behavior yet, and we certainly recommend it for practice leaders to protect the office. Now, for those of you on the call who use PPC or pay-per-click advertising, we believe there's a right way to set these accounts up and a wrong way. And the wrong way leaves you with nothing transferable should you choose to leave your agency partner. So when an agency or when a member of your team are setting up Google Analytics accounts, they can choose to sort of muddle them together with other business, with other practices, or they can set you up in a manner that is both independent and transferable. And it's a very, very simple decision, but it happens the moment the account is created. Now, you might be asking, Ryan, why does this matter? Why would I care if I could transfer my pay-per-click account? I would just, if I hired a new agency, I'd just have them start from scratch and build me a new account. And anyway, if I was leaving that agency, it probably means that the pay-per-click wasn't working. Well, here's the reality of pay-per-click advertising. As the account runs over time, you accumulate signals with Google that give credibility to your ads and may actually result in you paying a lower cost per click. There will also be accumulated inside your pay-per-click advertising account intelligence about what's working and what's not that can only be gained after months of letting pay-per-click ads run. If you have a partner who will not transfer the pay-per-click account to a new agency should you decide to leave, you will lose both the intelligence and perhaps lower costs per click when your new agency has to start from scratch. And for clinics that rely fairly heavily on pay-per-click advertising, this can be very damaging because often that intelligence and the lower cost per click can take 3 to 6 months to accumulate, setting you back both financially and in terms of lead generation and performance. So if you're active in pay-per-click advertising today, it's a great idea to simply have the conversation with your agency partner. Again, in the spirit of transparency, let them know we're not thinking of leaving right now, but we just want to understand what we would be in for if we ever did. Is our pay-per-click account something that is going to be freely transferred to a new agency partner, or our direct control should we like? Or is it set up in such a way, or is your policy such that you will not allow us to transfer this? All right, I know I'm giving you a lot. Just as a reminder, you're going to have access to both the recording and a copy of the slide deck in just about 3 days' time. Friday or Monday, we should have this in your hands. So don't worry too much about capturing all of these notes. As we move into the section here, we're down to our last 4 or so tips. We start talking about, well, the potential of bad separations, specifically not just with vendors, but also with members of our staff. Now, this is one that I think is perhaps one of the bigger risks and one of the more common problems that we see come up with practices is that they don't protect or have a system to catalog the logins and passwords that are used to set up various accounts in the name of the practice. So we definitely recommend that as these accounts are being created, so let's say some of you are right now deciding to get started on Instagram. So as you're creating those accounts, take the time to set them up under a user account that is centrally controlled by a member of your practice. Most of the sites today where you might be active, so I'll use a couple of examples, Google Analytics, Facebook, allow you to create a central administrative user, like a super user, and then to grant contributor access to individual members of your staff. Now this is hard if as a practice leader, you're kind of keeping the marketing activities at arm's length, or you simply delegate them and entrust them to a junior member of your team. This is a time and a place for you as the practice leader to step in, to assert a little control and authority, and simply say, hey, look, when we set this up, the user account needs to be under administrator@ourpractice.com, so an email address that is under the control of the practice leadership. We're going to define the password, and it might be okay for you to sit at the desk or to simply prescribe that password for your agency partners, then log in and change it so that nobody else can lock you out in the future. And then follow some simple steps to add either members of your staff or agency partners as contributors. And this action, as you do it, it's probably important as well that you take the time to catalog all of the locations, the logins and passwords that are critical for your practice. Now, what kind of sites might these be? This is going to be, as I've already mentioned, giving some examples, Facebook. This might apply to Google Analytics. This will certainly be true for all of the sites where your local business listings appear. Ratings and review sites where you can create accounts to control your content and respond directly to reviews. Another great example where you want username and password control. So the risks that we see here, and I'll share probably some of the worst ones that we've seen. I can think of a clinic that 2 years ago had spent years at that point, probably about 3 years accumulating a large following on Facebook. The account had been set up by a member of their aesthetic staff, and they had a pretty bad separation. And upon leaving the practice, that woman logged in and clicked a few buttons and deleted the practice's Facebook account. In addition to not only all of that content, the history of the account, but effectively lost that practice thousands of followers who had given permission for the practice to market to them, and cost years of effort and energy. And it's a very, very simple one. More complicated things that we've heard about more recently, and I alluded to one in the beginning, was members of the practice staff who'd been given logins and passwords to sensitive systems where patient information was stored, and having those people post-employment unaware of the practice because they didn't have rigorous controls around user access to systems. that person continued to use their username and password to extract sensitive data about patients that ultimately resulted in a HIPAA lawsuit. So just be mindful about how important it is today that we keep a clear record, not just of the users and password, but who has them, and that we maintain an administrative user account as well. Now, I want to talk for a second about social media. And for those that have seen presentations from Etna Interactive before, in which we talk about the importance of policies, this will be a little bit redundant. But we're recommending that you limit access to social media and provide privacy training to members of your staff. Formal policy, so a documented policy that's a part of your human resources manual is what we're recommending here. Identifying who or which roles are permitted, usually this is then going to be a linkage to a job description, who's permitted to contribute on social media on behalf of the practice, and that those contributors have gone through some kind of formal HIPAA training, and they've signed off saying they've received that training. Now, that signature, that acknowledgement, and that action is a reasonable measure under HIPAA in which you can clearly defend yourself as a practice, that you are, in fact, making an effort to protect patient privacy by both providing the limitations and the training for staff contributors. So let's move on to the last couple points here and talk about what's happening today as social media is on the rise. And it may be necessary or perhaps just convenient to work directly on handheld devices or tablets. Unfortunately, we see all too often today a lot of clinics are encouraging or allowing staff members to use their own mobile devices to contribute on sites like Instagram or to communicate with patients over text messaging. Now, our recommendation here is for those that have legal counsel to have a quick conversation with your counsel and to ask, and perhaps even the counsel provided by your med-mal insurance provider, what risks do you perceive in having our staff having these conversations or making these contributions on their mobile devices? And what would you recommend? Our recommendation out to our clinics, to our partners, is that they purchase a device that remains inside the practice, and that posting for sites like Instagram, communication on things like text messaging, messaging apps, especially for our clients in Canada on sites like WhatsApp, that it's on a device that's in the practice control so that you can at least work with your IT company to provide some measure of security and integrity for that content. We've seen staff members walk out of the practice with dozens or hundreds of sensitive patient photos and patient communications on their personal mobile phones with no step, no action taken to cleanse those items as a part of the separation process, which is why we close today with this last point. So before we dive in and talk about it, just a reminder, for those of you that by now have accumulated some questions, we've got some great questions coming in already. Feel free to go ahead and type those directly into the questions box. I'll be able to see those on my screen and address those for you here in just a moment. So our last bit of advice here, and hopefully many of you have done this already, but it's simply to adapt your employee separation checklist for the internet age. Some of you may not have this kind of formal policy in place, so this might be a call to action for you to make this happen, to put this together. But at the moment that you are deciding to part ways with an employee, there's certainly a lot of advisable human resources activities, like conducting an exit interview, reclaiming a key if they have a key, providing that final payout. But in the internet age, we also have to step back and ask some questions like, well, what systems did they have access to? And what passwords do they maintain? What data might exist on their personal hardware, as we just mentioned? And as you're entering into that moment where you are perhaps unsure, how is this separation going to go? Is this going to be an amicable parting, or am I going to see an angry and vindictive former employee on my hand? And we recommend that as you're having that conversation, to synchronize yourself with your information technology, with your IT partners, to lock them out of key systems like your practice management software, email accounts. All of those things are difficult to do, obviously, if you don't have a central IT partner, but make it all that more important that you do maintain control of passwords and a list of which systems or which website your employees have access to. Now, we're going to take a second here. I'm going to allow you to go ahead and start typing in those questions for me. If you would like more information, if you have questions that we didn't get to address today, feel free to email me directly. My email address is ryan@etnainteractive.com. And of course, we always welcome feedback on Facebook as to how you found today's webinar. Now remember, we're recording the session, and within just a few days' time, we'll be sending each of you a link that you can review the recorded webinar, and we'll provide a copy of the deck as an attachment in that email as well, so that you can work through each of these things in turn. Now, the first question that I see coming in is about domain names, and it says, what happens if we are not the registrar on our domain name and our agency partner refuses to turn it over? Do we have any recourse? The short answer on that is you do. So if you can establish that that domain name has been used for an extended period and that it is specifically referenced, pointing to you and to your brand, you can make the case that your domain name has been hijacked or usurped by your agency partner. It is a fairly long and complicated process, but by providing evidence of your ownership of the business, you may be able to provide evidence of the ownership of the domain to the registrar, the body that maintains or controls the record of registrant for your domain. And your new agency partner would very likely be able to support you in making that activity happen, in recovering the control of your domain name. As I mentioned, it's a painful process, and it can take some time to execute. So ideally, you're not going to let that happen. You're going to check your registrant today. You're going to work with that agency partner if you're not currently listed as the registrant to make sure that you are listed as the person who's controlling that domain record, and you're going to fix it proactively before things get contentious, maybe, if ever a separation should occur. So that's a great question. The other thing that's important, actually, a quick sidebar, is when you're reviewing the registrant record, be sure that both your postal address and the email address of record for the registrant are listed with you as well. That will ensure you receive notification if your domain name might be approaching expiry. My dad used to, when I was learning to drive, he had a funny saying that he used to use with me, which is that I think this came up the first time after I ran out of gas and ended up stranded on the side of the road, which is that the car runs just as well, Ryan, on the top half of the tank as it does on the bottom. It was an admonition to just, keep the tank full all the time and it wouldn't happen again. Well, as it relates to domain names, the same thing is true. The domain name works just as well, and it's cheap enough to register it out 10 years or more, so might as well go ahead and keep renewing and not wait until it's about to expire, and you might lose that incredible asset. So long registrations, early renewal are both really great ideas. The next question is about site files. So in the instance that, sorry about this, let me read this correctly. In the instance that we separate from our agency and they refuse to leave us with a full and functional version of our site, what do we do? So great question. It's a fairly complex process. So you have two choices. One is to start over and design a brand new site. Now, obviously, you're at risk if you get a late start of that, and either their web servers have been turned off or their site, the site goes offline for some reason that's not vindictive, or because the relationships become contentious and they simply refuse to continue to host you. You might be looking at several weeks to several months to get anything back online, and you don't want to let that happen. So if the path that you're choosing, usually either because it's time for a new site, or because you don't in fact own the full functional version of your site, the ideal action is to hopefully maintain a positive relationship with your old agency partner, to inform them that you intend to leave, but that you would like to continue to pay them to host your site, and then to work with your new agency partner to build that new site. Alternately, you can ask them for a copy of the export of what they are willing and contractually able to share with you, and provide that with your new agency to rebuild it on the platform that you would own. We've sometimes referred to that as a rescue, to build it anew on a new platform, but it will look and function like the old site, giving you better reliability and control. Question that has just come in, we have an employee that has gone out on FMLA. For those that don't know, the Family and Medical Leave Act. There's no guarantee that this employee will be coming back to the practice. This employee wants to work offsite from home and may have a remote desktop set up from her home PC. We have locked this employee from accessing our EHR system. Should we also deactivate their email? This employee has had access to many of our payers as well, and had access to change passwords. Should we contact those payers and change this information as well? So, so Family and Medical Leave Act is a very interesting point, and I have to admit here, I'm not an HR attorney, and there may be perceived as some potential legal human resources risks if you behave in a way of proactively treating a employee relationship as a separation before it's actually determined that the employee determines to separate. So in this particular instance, I might say this is an appropriate time to go back and do the audit that I suggested at the very beginning, make a list of all of the places where you have logins and passwords, make a list of who has those logins and passwords, and use this as an opportunity for a general cleanup, perhaps not pointed at this individual employee. You might make the determination that her role and the fact that she's no longer present inside the office makes it worthy or deems it worthy of updating passwords, and when she returns to work, you can provide her with her new password. So that would probably be how I would handle this, but I would definitely recommend, because we're dealing with an FLMA absence, that you consult your human resources attorney. All of these great questions. So we are right now at the 45-minute mark where I promised to cut off today's presentation. I want to thank everybody again for both participating and sharing their questions. There were just a few questions that we weren't able to answer during the live call. For those of you who sent those in, rest assured I'll send you personal emails to address those for you. Please stay tuned. In just a few days' time, we'll send you both a copy of the recording and a reference copy of the deck for you to use. I hope today's webinar was useful for you. If you liked what you heard today, head on over to facebook.com/Etna Interactive to leave us a review and perhaps share a few words about what you learned. Thanks so much, and have a great day.